I'm here to tell you that biology is not bigotry, it is reality. So I'm actually going to start with my action steps. The number one action step that everyone needs to take is to pay attention to the fact that language matters. In one of the first slides, I point out that human beings have a sex, not a gender. So when we are talking about people, talk about biological sex, and just keep repeating, biology is not bigotry, it's reality. Gender ideology is incredibly dangerous. Really, when we go through this presentation, by the end, you're going to see that it has nothing to do with science and everything to do with a cultish religion, really. It's a belief system. The ideology claims that biological sex isn't real. You will find this among the hardcore activists. They are actually saying the binary does not exist, male and female does not exist. They will tell you that disorders of sex development or intersex disorders proves that sex is a spectrum. They will say what people are really conceived with and born with is a gender identity. And therefore, we pop out of the womb either transgender or cisgender, not as a boy or a girl. And therefore, gender identity must replace sex in law and medicine. So what are the dangers? Well, first of all, it's already unleashed institutionalized child abuse, which I will explain further. And it's already destroying our most fundamental rights from free speech, free association, freedom of religion, as we will see. Again, people have a biological sex. Gender applies to grammar and things, and is very much related to sex stereotypes. When we name a Hurricane Gloria, we're not giving that hurricane a sex, we're assigning a gender. Human sexuality is binary because in nature, reproduction is the rule. It takes a man and a woman to make a baby. XX chromosomes, you're a girl. XY chromosomes, you're a boy. It's in every single cell of our body. Sex is not assigned, it declares itself, and we recognize it. Exceptions do not get rid of the rule. Exceptions do not trash the rule. One birth out of every 2,000, there will be a baby in which the appearance may not match the sex chromosomes. Medical testing will reveal what the disorder is. It has nothing to do with additional sexes. It's a scientific fact that thoughts and feelings are not hardwired. Skin color is hardwired. It's determined by genes and nothing else. Our thoughts and our feelings, they come about from our personality traits, our environment. Are we being propagandized? There is such a thing as disordered thinking. When people have a fixed false belief, we recognize that as abnormal. And we don't seek out to make people happy. For example, when I have a teenage girl who presents and says, I have a terribly scarred face, please refer me to a cosmetic surgeon, I'm not going to refer her, no. A girl who believes she is morbidly obese when she's actually starving herself, I'm not going to refer her for liposuction. When we have an adult who presents to her physician convinced that she is an amputee, trapped in an able body, and she is asking, please, get me to a surgeon to amputate my legs, we don't refer her. But if we have a man who comes in and says he's trapped in the wrong body, or we have a woman who comes in and says she is trapped in the wrong body, well, all of a sudden now psychiatry and medicine expects us to say, oh, you're right. Yeah, let's conform your body with mutilating surgeries and toxic hormones. Let's conform your body to your mistaken belief. Now, gender dysphoria or emotional alienation from your sex is real, and it does cause suffering. And in a small minority of children, at least prior to when it was being marketed to children, it occurred in a fraction, way under 1%. And the vast majority of these young children, over 80%, would outgrow their alienation from their biological sex by the time they were older adolescents or young adults. Twin studies prove that no one is born, quote unquote, transgender. Brain studies prove that our thinking, our rumination, and our behavior does change our brain structure and function. So when you hear that there are transgender studies that show there's a transgender brain, you can say no, because they didn't, it's the chicken and the egg. They did not prove that those changes were there in utero or at birth. All the evidence we have is that the brain changes with lived experience. So it's more likely that whatever they're pointing to on those functional MRIs are a result of the person behaving a certain way, not the cause of their behavior. And as I said, now transgender ideology has infiltrated medicine, and we're being told to conform children's bodies to their false beliefs. I call it institutionalized child abuse because the institutions of psychiatry, medicine, and education, from pre-K all the way up to the university and graduate levels, are pushing this. They recommend that children as young as age 2 be encouraged to impersonate the opposite sex, that we go ahead and force all of their peers to treat them as the opposite sex. This is indoctrination, and in slang, just total gaslighting. We are pulling the basis of reality out from under them. If a child can't trust his or her own physical body to tell them who they are, what can they trust? And if children can't trust their parents and teachers, those in authority, to lead them in the truth, who can they trust? Now, fast forward to when the child is 8 or 9 years old. Now doctors are saying, oh, we want to prevent them from becoming anxious during puberty, because when puberty hits, now their bodies are really going to declare their biological sex. So we want to arrest that. We need to shut down the normal process of puberty with Lupron, so that way they can just think about what sex they really are without being so anxious. So puberty blockers. But there's a problem. When you shut down puberty in a normal, healthy child, the rest of their friends go through puberty. They grow in height, they're maturing, and our patient with gender dysphoria is feeling rather more awkward. So then the gender experts say, well, we have to hurry up and get them on the cross-sex hormones, so that way they can go through the puberty of the opposite sex, the right puberty. Now, this is how it relates to the whole sexual revolution, abortion, life issue. Once you have taken a young child and you put them on puberty blockers, combine that now with cross-sex hormones, that child is permanently sterile. Surgical mutilation comes next. Girls as young as age 13 who think they are boys are being referred for double mastectomies. Genital surgeries, we are reassured by all the experts, those we wait till they're 18. But in fact, some 15-year-olds are being referred for genital surgeries. So, social impersonation, indoctrination, this slide just drives home the point. It's happening in school. It's all over, from picture books to teen literature. It's being promoted. The internet is rife with chat rooms run by adult transgenders seducing teens into the movement. The young woman in the bottom corner is a young, I believe she was a sophomore in high school, walked into the ladies' room, girls' room, found a boy in there, ran to the administration. She got in trouble. The young person in the other corner who's running, we'll talk about a little bit more. Those are two boys actually winning the Connecticut girls track competition. Puberty blocking with Lupron. The gender experts say, oh, puberty blocking is 100% reversible and not a problem. Not true, because it's, number one, if the child, we've never had a child go off puberty blockers in a study. The one study that was done, all 70 kids stayed on the puberty blockers and requested the cross-sex hormones. So all of those kids became sterile. But let's pretend you have a child who's on Lupron for 2 years, and then he does change his mind and comes off. Dear gender expert, can you give that boy back his 2 years of normal pubertal development? Because unless you can give him back the 2 years of normal development that you robbed him, you have no right saying it's reversible. There are also side effects. When Lupron is used for its FDA-approved uses, for example, it's approved for use in men with prostate cancer. It's approved for use in women with endometriosis. The cost benefit, FDA said, is worth it, but men and women do suffer memory problems. So what are we doing to physically healthy children when we arrest their puberty with it? We could really be messing with their minds. When the one and only use the FDA approves Lupron for in children is when they have the disease called precocious puberty. So you have a 6-year-old who's going through puberty. We want to help that 6-year-old avoid puberty until closer to age 11. That's okay, that's acceptable. But even in those children, as they get older, there is an increased risk in the girls of brittle bones, and in the boys who were appropriately treated, there's a slight increased risk of testicular cancer and maybe obesity. Transgendering the child, step number 3, the cross-sex hormones, again, sterility, and now we know over the course of a lifetime, it raises your risk factors for heart attacks, strokes, high blood pressure, blood clots, diabetes, various cancers, and yes, they are associated with emotional instability, which is what the other side says they're hoping to stabilize. Transition does not prevent suicide. They're always saying, oh, we have to do this to prevent suicide in children. What we know from the adult studies is there's a honeymoon period, right, in which you want, and think about it, if someone is so sold on something, they want it so badly, and they finally get it, there's this relief, right? And we do see this in adults with a transgender identification. They go through the hormones and the surgery, there's this period of relief. 10 years out, their mental health deteriorates well above the general population. 30 years out, their suicide rate, committed suicide rate, is 19 times greater. And we can't blame this on transphobia because this study was done in Sweden. So what's happening if the other side is right, if people are born with a gender identity, then we really shouldn't be seeing a huge increase in the problem. Oh, but we are. Over a 4,000% increase in the UK alone in less than a decade, and that's among girls. Why? Because socialization matters. But Dr. Cretella, the other pediatric association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, says you're just being hateful, and they back this medical affirmation. Well, put the brakes on. When the American Academy of Pediatrics writes a policy statement and passes it, something like 36 pediatricians are the only ones who pass it. The other 60,000 members, of which I was a member for nearly 20 years, we don't see their policies until 24 hours before it's announced in the media. Yeah. So when it comes to social issues where medicine interfaces with social values and social issues, these policies are written by largely self-selected social justice warriors. Okay, so just as Jordan Peterson has beautifully pointed out that academics, university suffers from groupthink, so too do the major medical and psychiatric associations. And here are some of the leading pediatricians pushing this medical toxic hormones surgical mutilation. At Duke University, Dr. Deanna Adkins exclaimed that gender identity trumps sex. Gender identity actually determines sex. Hormones, body parts, chromosomes has nothing to do with sex. I want to back up one. Diane Ehrensaft is probably the most vocal and prominent psychologist. She heads up the clinic at UCSF. She teaches her medical students, her pediatric residents, and numerous parent conferences. If you have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, teach them that what makes you a boy is when your brain tells you you're a boy. You know you're a girl when your brain tells you you're a girl. You know, some boys have vaginas, some girls have penises. This is what she recommends. And she has also more than once told the story that, you know, I have a friend who's transgender, and when he was 2 years old, with his long hair as a 2-year-old and the barrettes that his mom put in his hair, he ripped those out. He was telling his mother he wasn't a girl. And similarly, if you have a little boy, you think you have a boy, and he unsnaps his onesie and twirls around, he could be sending you a gender message. These are the people leading the movement in medicine. These are the leaders who control what is taught to medical students and medical residents. Sorry. Dr. Joanne Olson Kennedy, LA Children's Hospital. She is a general pediatrician specialized in adolescent medicine. She is married to a woman who has transgendered, therefore appears male. The male appearing woman of the couple is a psychotherapist. Together, they are leading the charge of transgendering children. Dr. Kennedy, in one of her public presentations, told a story. She said, I had she's telling this to medical students and physicians for continuing medical education, urging them to give their patients the words to express their true identity. She said, for example, I had an 8-year-old little girl who came in, and I asked her, are you a boy or a girl? And the 8-year-old girl looked at her like, duh, I'm a girl. My body, yeah, good. And Dr. Kennedy said, well, suppose I gave you a Pop-Tart, and the wrapper was strawberry, but you bit into that Pop-Tart, and it tasted blueberry. What kind of Pop-Tart is it really? Well, blueberry. Now, this was a girl who was a tomboy. So with that, she looked at her mom and said, Mom, I think I'm a boy in a girl wrapper. And Dr. Kennedy said, see, I just gave her I gave him the words to express himself. Also recently, after criticism for recommending double mastectomy to 13-year-old girls, her response was, you know, teenagers make big decisions all the time, and, you know, let's face it, if they change their mind later on, they can just go out and get a pair. Just go out and get a pair of breasts, should the girls suddenly wake up one day realizing they were lied to. We're also seeing the erasure of what I call a right to reality therapy. 14 states, DC, and 44 counties across the country have made it illegal for a therapist to help a child come to accept their bodies. This means that in those 14 states, here in DC and 44 counties, therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists are forced to send children down the transgender pathway. Erasure of first liberties, especially when it comes to women. Schools, stores like Target, gyms, if a man identifies as transgender and says he's a woman, the law's on his side, he is in women's spaces, and there's nothing you can do about it. The picture down in I guess your left corner represents, that's a home for women who have suffered domestic abuse or they're homeless. There is a case now, I believe that's in California, of about half a dozen women who were assaulted in the Amos house. Women's prisons, there's a case, again, I believe, in Texas, about a half a dozen women inmates who were assaulted by a transgender prisoner. And I just received an email today regarding a similar case, a case in Massachusetts. There is a transgender woman, so biological man, who still has his equipment, and he has brought a complaint, and I believe he's going to file a lawsuit against a beauty salon that would not wax his bikini area. And here, now Massachusetts, by the way, has a gender identity law, so that's what wants to bring the suit under that law. Connecticut also recognizes gender identity, and again, the top two runners are biological boys, and they literally ran away with the title in the Connecticut girls state track competition. And as we know, or you may or may not know, parents are losing custody of their kids if they refuse to go along with transgender hormones. This is not the picture of the actual parents involved, but the case was in Cleveland, Ohio, and I've also received several phone calls from across the country from parents going through a divorce, and I will get the call from the parent who wants to save her 15-year-old daughter. No, in every case, it's been a 15-year-old girl who suddenly awoke to the fact that I've been transgender all along. Now, her depression, her past psychological history, that's all there too, but the gender clinics deemed it irrelevant. Clearly, as a pediatrician, I would say, well, gee, maybe this nasty divorce has triggered this reaction in her, but oh no, not the gender experts. Bottom line, the parent who wants to save the child, who simply wants the child to get more real psychotherapy, is the parent who loses medical decision-making in the divorce proceedings. So, gender ideology is absolutely a vehicle for tyranny and for totalitarianism. It's a cult of radical autonomy. It's not about science. It's about the belief, the pagan belief, that our soul or thoughts, it's this dualistic belief that we are, the real us, is separate from our physical body. That is a religious belief. It's a pagan Gnostic belief. It is not scientific fact. So what gender experts are doing is rewriting Genesis. Okay, and we have to make, as a doctor, my board, people say, oh, don't talk about, no, we have to talk about religion for the very reason that Mr. Moffat said at the beginning. The value of life is not a scientific fact. That is a moral judgment. The inviolability of life. Science tells us when life begins and when life ends. It doesn't tell us to value it. Science tells us everything about our biological sex. That is material reality. We, from our worldview, either value the telos that we find in nature, value the fact that a man and a woman create a family, and this is the root of our natural law jurisprudence, or else we can kiss our Constitution and our first liberties goodbye. So transgenderism is about beliefs trumping reality. It's sowing chaos into the language, because rather than talking about sex, it's got this nebulous term gender. So we have to reject the term gender. It's making up pronouns. We've got to reject those. Do not go along. And as far as the aggressive, I mean, I shouldn't have to convince you about the aggressive forms of censorship and enforcement that we're witnessing. If there's no such thing as a common human nature, then we can't have common human rights. So this really, we're in the battle of our lives with this one. And I'm going to end it there, just saying, please, language is everything. Just drum it into your friends and family. Biology is not bigotry. Natural law is what our first freedoms are based on, and that's what we have to fight for. Thank you.